Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.
Welcome everybody, it's great to see you here at the German Climate Pavilion. Thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule. Do you feel what I feel? The heat and the sweat, right? So we are right here for that topic, of course, not for the sweat, but for the heat, as we're gonna debate about how to manage heat waves. And that comes at the right time, as we all know, it's day 4 of the COP28, and today, at the 3rd of December, is the Health, Relief, Recovery and Peace theme day of the COP28. And the question really is, how can we do better? How can we manage the heat waves that we are facing? And what are we doing with the knowledge that we have already about the topic, and how to put the knowledge really into practice? Why is it difficult to put our knowledge so into practice, and what can we do that we skip away from the lighthouse project that we all know to really triple it down and put it down in reality? So we talk about rising temperatures, obviously. We talk about management instruments. We talk about best practices and the gaps in between. And it's great to have you, as I said, all here. We do have a panel later on, and I'm very excited for your questions as well. So please feel free to ask your questions, because I think that's why you're here for, right? You brought some questions with you, and we'd like to have a two-way conversation here in the German Climate Pavilion. I welcome now for the welcome address Dr. Thomas Steffen. He is the State Secretary at the German Ministry of Health, coming from Berlin. It's great to have you. This is your stage.
Madam Moderator, distinguished colleagues, dear guests, it's a real pleasure to speak to you today. And also on behalf of Minister Karl Lauterbach, I would really like to welcome you in the German Pavilion. And I'm very, very thankful that today we are having the opportunity to discuss the topic of managing heat waves with the participation of international and German experts from science, organizations and civil society. And I really would like to echo what you just said. We need your inspiring ideas and questions about this very, very complex topic. And you should really contribute with your reflections to the ongoing discussion. And we just had a few minutes ago a very, very good European discussion round, a panel in the European Pavilion. And the discussion really reflected the basic principle that we have to think globally and we have to act locally. And there was the mayor of Utrecht in the Netherlands who said that we are in the course of the greening of the city. And then it was the European Commission to add one point, which I was not aware of. The more greening you have in a city, the better is the correlation with mental health. And it really illustrates that things are closely interlinked in that very complex and holistic picture that we are talking about. And that is why at the end of the day, we can discuss a lot of principles, a lot of basic ideas. At the end of the day, we have to get into the doing, I guess, in many, many areas on a local and on a national and not on an abstract international level, but we have to do things together and to think, in any case, very, very globally. This is my impression of the last hours here in Dubai. Germany is hosting this event today because the impact of climate change on human health is an important risk factor all over the world. Heat is one of the many parallel threats to health, not only in large cities, not only in Europe, we all know that, also in rural areas, and above all, already on a massive scale in many, many southern countries. Heat affects everyone's health and well-being. Heat is a major risk factor for the cardiovascular system and can lead to life-threatening illness such as heat exhaustion, health cramps, heat stroke or dehydration. We all know that. The health effects triggered by heat can also lead to psychological stress, anxiety, trauma, and depression. According to the WHO, the risk of premature birth, I wasn't aware of that, increases by 16% due to heat. Indirect health risks can also arise from negative changes in environmental conditions as a result of global warming, namely the reduced availability and quality of drinking water and food. According to the IPCC report of the year 2022, the rise in global temperatures is not only a threat to human health. The rising heat alone could lead to large areas becoming completely uninhabitable by the year 2100. We therefore want to discuss these aspects with our guests today in today's panel discussion and focus on our experiences with countermeasures, how to manage also in future times these heat waves. Let me start by briefly outlining what Germany is specifically concerned about and how we try to deal with hot summers, breaking alarming new temperature records every year. As in many countries, so in Germany, the most vulnerable among us are most affected: children, pregnant women, the elderly people with bad health preconditions. And to be honest again, it a little bit reminds me of what we had to do during the Corona crisis just some months and years ago. We really had to focus on the vulnerable groups in our societies and really to reflect how to best protect them. And we exactly have to do the same again now when it comes to heat and health. And for example, looking into our data, there's a clear evidence that more than 80%, I repeat, 80% of all who died in association with heat this summer in Germany were over 75 years old. Therefore, the overarching aim of managing heat waves is to protect our people, particularly those vulnerable groups that I just mentioned. And in our understanding, heat and health protection is an issue that we can tackle only through joint actions by involving all possible stakeholders. In order to coordinate all those necessary actions, we released a heat health action plan this summer. In addition to the important work at the Ministry of Health, many other ministries and stakeholders, for example, associations of healthcare professionals and hospitals, public health authorities, health insurance companies, and a wide range of civil society engagement that we have seen have contributed with their very specific expertise and their responsibilities. In the first place, our main focus was to implement short-term measures during summer times. For example, raising public awareness of health risks associated with heat and how to improve individual heat and health protective behavior. A national event, the Heat Health Protection Day, was designed as a highly visible starting point. Furthermore, the heat warning system issued by the German Meteorological Service was disseminated widely. In addition, vulnerable patients in particular were addressed, for example, by addressing elderly care homes and services, both healthcare professionals and residents, and by the Mixed Methods campaign jointly organized by the German Association of General Practitioners and the Ministry of Health. These have been very important steps in the right direction, and we have to repeat them in future times. This joint action led to a remarkable drop of heat-related mortality that we have seen this specific summer. Second, we developed heat health protection measures that effectively will be ready for use next year. For example, national guidelines for heat health action plans for hospitals and elderly care homes and services, the use of digital heat warning for mobile devices like app services and cell broadcasting. To strengthen effective coordination, we have to set up a round table, and we have set up a round table asking all involved ministries to exchange heat health information directly and promptly. We aim to establish a structured annual process of heat health action planning at the federal level, involving different ministries again and different stakeholders according to their specific expertise and responsibilities. And also, because it was already mentioned that we have to talk about benchmarking and best practices based on the French model, this process will be set up according to the principle of plan, do, check, and act. Today, when temperature is low in Germany, it was minus 4 degrees Celsius in Berlin, and at the beginning of the winter season, we have almost completed the stage of at least check. And our to-do lists fill up with improvements needed and more advanced measures. For example, strengthening the awareness of UV radiation protection within outdoor workers, improving the use of early warning systems on mobile devices, as I just mentioned, or developing surveillance system to monitor heat-related mortality. The preliminary results that we observe and the co-benefits that result from the cooperation between the various stakeholders are very, very evident. And therefore, we like to share our experiences. We would like to share it with you and also with others. And we are open, as I said in the beginning, to all new ideas. I'm very much looking forward to the various insights of managing heat waves that will arise from this event today and the impulses of those involved here today. So again, thank you very much for being our guests and for sharing your knowledge and your experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. State Secretary. We continue with the first keynote, a short presentation by Dr. Vladimir Kentrovsky. You are a technical officer for climate change and health in the Water and Climate Program in the World Health Organization. And you have a broad background in all the new guidelines for heat health action plans. So we are very much looking forward for your speech. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me here. And definitely I'm also impressed by speech of Dr. Stefan, the State Secretary, and the work what Germany is implementing. We both come from the same event, and I see only this event as advocacy to continue our dialogue, and probably with the new people, because signals what human activities have done to the environment is becoming increasingly surreal. So this is something we in WHO recognize, and I will start probably with the big picture in the region, because in the last 5 decades we noticed that each decade is hotter than the previous one. And the number of the extreme weather even in our European region is increased in the last 50 years in factor 5. And we definitely consider the extreme weather even as a problem, but for the first time in the history of WHO, we declare emergency this summer for climate change and extreme weather even, because this is the way how WHO and all other member states can work together to tackle the problems. Because even the storms and floods are the most extreme weather events in our region. The most deadliest one are the heat and the heat waves. So I just use the example of last year, records only for 35.7 hours out of 53 member states of our WHO European region, where we registered more than 61,000 heat deaths. So this is additional signal for all that we are not talking about the future, we are talking about now, because we already late with the responses. And as you see here, unfortunately, this burden is not going alone. It's going hand in hand with the more wildfires and which increase the air pollution, and this is additional burden. But also, there are no good news for the future. Our estimation is that more and more people will die in the coming year if we do not take any precautionary measures. And what is good is that we know that timely public health measure can prevent the heat deaths. So this is the key, and this is the solution. We have in our region more than 23 countries at the national level who developed the heat health action plan in the last 20 years. But we are not satisfied. We want to have all, because heat is problem in Germany, it is problem in UK, it is problem in Sweden, because just in Scandinavia, just 2018, we have a lot of fires, never experienced in that time. We have last year, which was the hottest summer in our European region, more than 40 degrees in UK. It was also the records for Germany was also absolute records. So we have to act, and we know how. We can base on our previous experience of having the heat health action guidelines since 2008. Just to let you know, we are not talking about the new problem. I will just remind you, on 2003, the first mega heat wave in Europe, in Western Europe, where France, Belgium, part of Germany and Switzerland were attacked with more than 70,000 deaths in that time. So this was a trigger to develop, for WHO to develop the heat health action plan guideline, which was example for many countries to develop their own national one. But after 15 years of experience and collecting the data, because one of the main mandate of WHO is research agenda, we have sufficient evidence to see the way of implementation. Does it work or not? So we have published our Heat and Health Book of Evidence, as we said, in 2021, which is up to date, the most important, as we call, book, where we collect more than, as you see, 600 scientific sources, both peer-reviewed and from countries' example. We based on our core element of heat health action plan to see what is work well, what is not work well. But then we also conduct the survey with the member states who already have developed their own heat health action plan to see how they consider the implementation of the WHO heat health action guidelines. And we got few of them, a few interesting area where probably we need to update. So it's ongoing update, funded by the European Commission, and with participation of a lot of experts. And we are thankful that we are based in Bonn, in Germany. Our WHO European Center of Environment and Health covered the environment health issue for all 53 member states. And we are only center of WHO which is based, as I said, to our host country, Germany, which can help us a lot to rely on the capacity of the German institution, both academic but also federal institution, which can give us a space and give us support in conducting some of this survey or ongoing activities. And definitely what was also mentioned about ongoing activity, this can be probably very important for us in coming years, because we intend to publish updated version of our heat health action guidance in 2025, and probably we will rely a lot of the German case studies, which is ongoing. And this is the aim of this partnership because even this is European focus guidelines, but it has global relevance because there are no existing other in WHO. So that's why this is very important for us to have this. But one of the areas where we found in both in scientific literature review and on the survey that it's not completely covered and there are some gaps are communication. So that's why we need to communicate, to find and to support the new waves of communication to reach the most vulnerable. Dr. Stefan mentioned many of these vulnerable groups, and this is a very complex issue. But that's why we need to develop a really, and we are now 2023, with a lot of tools available to find the way how we can reach better to these people. But also, this is only possible if we engage all others in this. This is not health action plan. This is the heat health action plan where all have their own roles. So this is the natural services. Without early warnings, it's not even possible to call for any of advices in relation to prevent the measures. Then it's not possible without the communication how to reach to this. Local community, other non-governmental organization, media is very important. So all stakeholders need to be involved and try to synchronize their activities. Of course, somebody needs to lead, and in this case, in many countries, probably it's Ministry of Health, or at local level, some health department, but it doesn't mean that this is only health plan. In the same time, during the updates, we do the systematic literature review on our public advice, and that's why it's also very important as WHO to be based on the evidence. So this is an ongoing process. We publish our public advice in 2011, so they need to be evaluated, and we are doing now, and we hope that very soon they will be part of the communication strategy development, and the new public advice will be part of the new guidance in 2025. But this is our Keep Cool campaign, which is since 3 years ago yearly implemented, and many of our advice are translated in more than 20 languages in WHO European region. We publish each May, and we try to communicate with the member states where still they don't have their heat health action plan, but to have this available to take into consideration their specificity. So this is some of the updates, what is going on in WHO European region, and we are looking to work with you in the coming months and years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kędrzowski, for your insights and the presentation and all the links that you're sharing with us. Thank you for being here today. Our next speaker, and I'm very honored to introduce you now to her. She is a leading internationally recognized expert on the science and policy of sustainability, particularly when it comes to climate change and to global health issues, with 20 years of experience in original public health research, science assessment, capacity development, and policy advice. She is the professor of environment, climate, and global health, coming from the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health from beautiful Australia. And she's also IPCC lead author of the 6th Assessment Report, Chapter 7, when it comes to human health, well-being, and the changing structures of communities. Thank you for being here, Professor Catherine Bowen.
Many thanks for that introduction, Katie, and many thanks to the German government and the Pavilion for inviting me to speak today. And I'm thrilled that my slides are working. That was the first test. So I've been asked to provide a brief overview of the IPCC report, so beyond heat, but including heat, and then I'll drill down into heat and its health impacts. Could I have a 2-minute warning, please, Katie, when I'm... Yeah, excellent, thank you. So I wanted to start with our headline statement from the 6th Assessment Report, Working Group 2, Impacts, Vulnerability and Adaptation. The scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss the brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. So the IPCC report doesn't just lay out those types of high-level statements, but also talks about the kinds of solutions we can implement as well. So I encourage you to have a look if you haven't yet. This is a helpful figure to understand the links between climate change up the top there and then health impacts down the bottom. So you can see a range of health impacts from injury and mortality from extreme weather events, for example, in the left, all the way through to vector-borne diseases, malnutrition, foodborne diseases, and as well, as we heard from the State Secretary, the mental and psychosocial impacts of climate change. So what's important, though, in the middle there are these factors that mediate the extent to which we see these impacts playing out in individuals and in populations. It's not a straightforward line between changes in the climate and health impacts. In the middle there, it's really important that we understand vulnerability factors. So this might be what sort of environment you live in, what your political system is, what your level of poverty is. All of these factors are vital for us to understand to develop appropriate health responses. These are the high-level statements from the Health and Wellbeing chapter from the IPCC. So from the top left, we know that all health impacts are increasing, so the evidence is clear. They're all on the rise. We also know that conflict and migration and displacement are also increasing, and this is a very complex set of literature that we set out to assess. We also know that there's an increasing literature around mental health impacts, as we've already heard. But we do also know that with proactive and timely and effective adaptation, many risks for human health and well-being can be reduced and some potentially avoided. The VHC indicates very high confidence. So with very high confidence, most of these statements. And then we know this concept of climate resilient development, and this is where we incorporate adaptation, mitigation and sustainable development all together. We're trying to avoid the siloed nature of working in adaptation or working in mitigation. How do we combine these areas? And we were able to assess the literature to demonstrate that there's a strong potential to generate substantial co-benefits for health and well-being. And we've heard that a little bit this morning in the plenary as well. The transformational changes that we need to see for this climate resilient development, though, will be more effective if they're responsive to regional, local and Indigenous knowledge. And as I talked about before, consider the many dimensions of vulnerability. Again, unfortunately, in the 6th assessment report, as we also saw in the 5th and the 4th and the 3rd and all the reports, the impacts of climate change will be felt inequitably across the globe. So hopefully in the 7th report, we won't say this and we will have seen some progress and the impacts will not be inequitably distributed. Important for us to consider also as the health sector and people working beyond the health sector that we're dealing with a whole range of different types of challenges as well. So it's not just limited access to water, sanitation and health, which we know is core for our well-being and health, but we know that there's also many communities in the world that are reliant on livelihoods that are sensitive to climate change. We know that we're still dealing with high levels of poverty globally, in many countries weak leadership, lack of funding for health and climate change in particular, and we're seeing an increase in lack of trust in government and a lack of accountability. So we've got these overlapping challenges that we need to deal with. In the AR6 as well, we were able to assess the literature around the concept of compounding and cascading risks and impacts. So no longer are we feeling one extreme weather event, for example, in isolation and then another one perhaps in 4 or 5 years. What we're seeing are extreme weather events. In my country, we had our black summer bushfires of 2019, 2020. Following that, in 2020, we found the same communities were faced with floods. And then we found another cycle of fires after that. So no longer are we dealing with issues in isolation. They're compounding, and the impacts on communities are substantial. There's no longer the time to build back up. This is a critical issue. In the IPCC, we also assess the literature in terms of the future global climate risks. And so this is not in the health chapter, but you can see all of these issues have clear health relevance. Heat stress, of course, is the focus for today. Water scarcity, food security, and flood risk. All of these hazards will have grave implications for our human health and well-being. So now moving to the heat focus. And we know that in high-income countries, heat is one of the largest weather-related causes of death, and we've heard it already this morning in a good amount of detail why heat is so important. So in addition to mortality, hot weather and heat extremes are associated with increased emergency room visits and hospital admittance, and increased deaths from cardiorespiratory and other diseases. But we also see an exacerbation of underlying health conditions, adverse pregnancy and birth outcomes, and increased healthcare costs. So as health professionals and in terms of policymakers as well, it's really important to be able to articulate the savings that can be made if we're able to appropriately respond to heat as a pressure on our health system. So we know also that high temperatures also affect people's capacity to work, so productivity is a key issue here, and the impact this has on our economy and their willingness to undertake physical activity, so keep healthy. Also, we know that the healthier we are, the less impact we have on the burden of the health system. So this is hot off the press. The 2023 report of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate presents the most recent evidence on heat-related health impacts. And based on their heat-related indicators, some headline findings include that between 2013 to 22, infants and people older than 65 years experienced, on average, 100% more days of heat waves per year than in the period 1986 to 2005. In 2013 to 2022, compared with 1991 to 2000, there were 241 additional hours annually during which heat posed a moderate or higher risk of heat stress during light outdoor physical activity. Heat exposure led to the loss of 490 billion potential labour hours in 2022, nearly 42% increase from the period 91 to 2000. And in 2018 to 22, people experienced on average 86 days of health-threatening high temperatures annually. And 60% of these temperatures were made more than twice as likely to occur by human-caused climate change. Moving on to mental health impacts. This slide is a bit difficult to read, apologies for that, but I'll just give you an overview. We know that extreme heat also presents multiple challenges for our mental health, particularly for individuals using medication. For example, some medications reduce heat tolerance, and extreme heat can increase adverse drug reactions. Extreme heat increases the risk of delirium and the exacerbation of cognitive difficulties in people with dementia. The very young, the very old, and those with comorbid conditions such as diabetes are at particular risk. During hotter weather, the research is showing that there is an increased risk of death for patients with psychosis, dementia, and substance abuse. There may also be increased risk of adverse effects for those taking substances and prescribed medications, which make people more vulnerable to the harm from heat. Moving on to urbanisation and heat health risks. So urban areas, as we know, as we're feeling in this room, it's a bit of a microclimate here, are generally warmer than adjacent rural and suburban areas, as you can see in the figure. So this phenomenon, I'm sure you're aware, is known as the urban heat island effect. So, for example, while the average air temperature in the centre of a large city like London can be 4 degrees higher than outer rural areas, this differential can reach 10 degrees during extreme heat events, with the largest difference at night. So this is a really important issue that we need to understand when we're designing our cities. And we're looking at not just the physical health benefits of green space, but as we heard from the State Secretary, we know that there are really excellent mental health and wellbeing benefits from increasing both the green and the blue space of our surroundings. If we look at ageing populations and heat health risks, we know that we're in an age of increasing elderly, and how are we going to make sure that this group is especially looked after? So the evidence does suggest that older populations are disproportionately affected by heat-related illnesses. So, for example, data from the US clearly demonstrates that 65 years and over individuals are most likely to be hospitalised for heat stress. From 2001 to 2010, the 20 states covered in this figure recorded a total of about 28,000 heat-related hospitalisations. And people aged 65 years and over accounted for more heat-related hospitalisations than any other age group. Men tend to have a higher risk of heat-related illness than women because they're more likely to work in outdoor occupations such as constructions. But these statistics are likely to be conservative, as they don't include cases where illnesses were not diagnosed as heat-related. And we're not very good in terms of our health information systems and recording a heat-related admission in a hospital or a healthcare facility, for example. We don't necessarily make that connection when we're dealing in the healthcare system. So this is my last slide, and I just wanted to, actually second last slide, but I'll see how I'm going with time. I just wanted to bring to your attention this piece of litigation that many of you might know already. So in March this year, a group of senior women for climate protection, Switzerland, they sued Switzerland before the European Court of Human Rights based on the existing evidence of climate-related heat events and older women. And to quote, "With our lawsuit, we're demanding that the federal authorities correct the course of Swiss climate policy because the current climate targets and measures are not sufficient to limit global warming to a safe level. Since only people with legal standing can sue, we have formed the Climate Seniors Association. Why an association? Because that way the legal proceedings do not depend on individual persons. Why female seniors? Because older women are particularly susceptible to intense and frequent heat waves. Obviously, we are aware that older men, people with disabilities, as well as small children, also suffer from heat waves and other climate effects. By focusing on the proven particular susceptible of us older women, we're simply enhancing our lawsuit's chance of success, which is ultimately good for everyone. So I wanted to leave you with that example of community action and with a particular reference to heat and how all of us in different ways really feel the impacts of heat, and we really need to be pushing along with evidence-based decision making, and a great example of which was the work in Germany and Berlin and also the WHO's Heat Health Action Plan. Many thanks.
Catherine Bowen, thank you so much for your insights. And with that, we start into our panels. So we do have 2 online panelists, but we also have 1 live panelist. Sophie Gapp, please join me here on stage, and I'll do the introduction in a second. Give her a round of applause, as she is the first live guest here, and the other ones, they are joining us online. So I do a quick introduction round, and then we start, of course, right into our conversation. With us is Professor Andreas Mazarakis. He is the head of Research Center Human Biometeorology of the German Meteorological Service from beautiful Freiburg in the south of Germany, joining us online, and bringing now on stage really the perspective of the German heat health warning system with some heat maps from Germany. I love that. As a geographer, I'm a big fan of maps, so thank you for bringing some slides along. You are an international expert in the field of heat health warning systems and also, of course, an advisor for the organizer of the Olympic Games in hot areas, and that's also something that we'd like to talk on about sports events. So thanks for joining us, Andreas. With us is also, on our right-hand side, Andreas Smacic. He's the Technical Manager, Anticipation and Methodology Development at the German Red Cross, joining us now digitally from Berlin in Germany. He has a broad knowledge when it comes to a comparison of a national versus an international disaster preparedness, and when we look into the heat in the mega cities, also something that we touched upon already, and what are the direct effects and social problems for vulnerable groups. And you were also an organizer of a heat simulation exercise during the German G7 presidency in 2022. Of course, we want to hear more about that in a second as well. Thank you also for joining us, and greetings from Dubai to Berlin. And we have Sophie Gapp with us. You studied medicine and public health. You are a research associate at the Center for Planetary Health Policy based in Berlin, Germany. You're focusing on the global governance of planetary health and the Center for Planetary Health Policy. That's the center that you're working on. And that's an independent think tank in Berlin. Also a forum for scientific policy advice where we talk about it, where we have these conversations that we were just asked to have more at the nexus of global environmental change and health with the aim of achieving, well, yeah, a transformation of social systems. And you're linking research, practical project work, and policy advice, not just in your practical work, but also here now on the panel. Thank you also for joining us. Thank you. And before we start into our conversation, we start with a few slides. So, Professor Mazarakis, dear Andreas, would you share with us what you've prepared when we talk about managing the management of the heat waves?
Yeah.
And you can hear us both well, right?
Yes, I can hear
Andreas
you.
Andreas and Thomas, you can hear me well as well? Perfect.
Yes,
all right.
I can hear you well.
Okay, Andreas, well then the stage is all yours. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to share some specific insights of the heat health warning system in Germany. The heat health warning system in Germany is operating since 2005. It was a development which not started because of the heat wave 2003, but that was before, because we had in Germany in 1994 also a strong heat wave, let me say, with many damages concerning human health, was not in the south, but more in the north. The system is, let me say, a very sophisticated system or a complex system, consists from several parts. And before to start and talk more in detail about the heat health warning system, I would like to mention some specific things which are important concerning heat. Heat is a very complex issue when we talk about the effects on humans. In reality, it's not only heat, it's more complex considering UV radiation, considering the pollen, considering air pollution, and so on. In general, humans don't have a sensor for temperature. We realize, we experience the changes, what happens. We can be around 3 to 4 centigrade when we have to guess the temperature. And in reality, we have the combined effect between temperature, humidity, radiation, and also wind speed. But we also include also thermophysiological factors like age, like activity, like clothing. These factors are all to be calculated. They have to be known. In order to do that, we have a specific approach. And this approach is not new. It's in reality about 80 to 90 years old. We use the heat exchange of the human body. And here, based on the human exchange of heat, we can describe this in terms of a temperature, which is an equivalent temperature, and defines, let me something like real field temperature. And this real field temperature, we combine with epidemiological data, and this epidemiological data, and you can see here some examples for 2015 and 2003, how the mortality, and this is the excess mortality, that means this is the extraordinary mortality, that more people die for the specific time of the year, which can be 50% higher in a specific day. And we see a clear correlation here that there is an increase in the mortality when we have strong and extreme heat stress. And this is the basis for us in order to define thresholds. And these thresholds are not meteorological, but they are human biometeorological. That means a combination between meteorology and epidemiology and also human health. This is one of the factors that we have, but we have, of course, additional factors which are included in the heat health warning system. This is not only the conditions based on the perceived temperature or on the real field temperature, which is during the day outside. We need, in order to release the warnings, to combine these factors. And we need, concerning the levels of warning that we have, the criteria. This criteria is defined based on epidemiology, what I mentioned before. The second factor that we have, and we know that, is the conditions indoors, because we spend most of the time indoors, also during heat, but we need to recover from the situation during the day, during the night. That means we need the conditions indoors. And therefore we have, for the heat health warning system in Germany, a model which calculates in elderly and care homes temperature conditions during all the night in order to combine this with the situation during the day. These are the two main factors that we have, but there is also an additional factor, because we know that heat wave or extreme heat conditions which occur in the early summer have stronger implications on humans, also because of mortality. That means we include also a filter called medium-term adaptation. That means for the heat wave. That means these thresholds are not fixed, but they are averaged, moved, and adapted during all the year. And the third factor that we have is the duration. That means we know that the mortality is increasing during after 2 or 3 days. These are the 4 main factors, also because of the adaptation, and this produces a warning level. And we have 2 warning levels. The warning level is when level 2 is when the perceived temperature is over 38. These are the factors during the day outside, indoor, duration, also adaptation. But as mentioned by Professor Bowen before, the urban heat island, that means the people who are leaving the city are more people are leaving the cities. Therefore, we have additional information which included in the warnings of level 1 about the conditions in the city. We calculate with an urban heat island model. We simulate and calculate in order to know how the cities behave or how the exposure in the city is much higher. And then we have also, for the risk group, and one of the risk groups that we have is the elderly people, we have modified thresholds, which is not anymore for the level 2 warnings, which is perceived temperature 38, is not 38, but it's 36. Because we know that the perceived temperature or the conditions of heat for the elderly people in reality, and we simulate here an elderly person, which is 70 years old, 75 years old, and we know that extreme heat stress is earlier for older people. But let me say regular heat stress, which can be modified in a perceived temperature about 33, 34, doesn't mean in reality that elderly people are exposed. That means the gap between extreme and strong heat conditions are different for the elderly people. This is the reason, because we have specific information in the warning level 1 that this means that elderly people are in reality in warning level 2. And of course we include also here adaptation. The question now is how to get these warnings or how to find this information. Since 2022, we have a specific website where we put all the information together to make for our recipients or for the people easier in order to find this information And to register, because we deliver this information also via an email newsletter, and we use here 3 steps. The one step is the warning, which the warning is for the present and the next day. And since last year, we have extended the period about heat to 3 to 6 days, which is not so clear, which is not so, let me say, so the resolution concerning the heat warning, which is in Germany, is the county level. It's not for the day 3 to 6, it's not so accurate, it's more rough estimation. It's not directly the counties, but it's a specific region. And this can be, of course, anyone can register on that, and we have a strong focus on the communication possibilities that we have. That means we release the heat warnings. We have the heat warnings on a map, which we show also in the transparency before. And then we have several possibilities in order to provide this heat warning. First of all, we have the email newsletter, then we have the ministers and the authorities, and we deliver for each federal state in Germany, because we have with all the states an administration agreement. We focus on the care sector, also in general population, and all this information is free available, is available not only in the smartphone applications by the government or by the German Meteorological Service, but this information is delivered in open data and on the warning maps, and anyone can get this information. Some information about the year 2023, some maps. This maps is available for everyone, especially the data for that is available for everyone. 2023, we had hot conditions when we look about, let me say, the summer days or the heat days, which is the threshold of 30 centigrade, which was more than 40 or 50. But when we give focus on the heat warnings, we had something like a moderate year with heat warnings. We had finally five situations with heat warnings. And don't talk about heat waves. There was sometimes a shorter one, sometimes longer one, especially we had in August, in the beginning of August, about 8th to 10th August to the end of August, we had a very long lasted heat waves, and we have been in the second longest heat wave. But it was something curious, something strange, because we didn't have temperatures in the beginning which was higher than 30. But because of the higher levels of humidity, the perceived temperature was close to the warning level 2, and therefore it was an extraordinary year, especially because of humidity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. This is your applause. I hope you can hear this. Thank you for bringing the maps along. And coming from the German Meteorological Service, also with us is Tobias Fuchs, the head of the Climate and Environment Division, and of course also member of the Executive Board. So you get a wave, Andreas. I hope you could see that from colleague to colleague, of course. Thank you. All right, coming to our next little short input. With us, as I mentioned, is Thomas, and I would say the floor is all yours now. Give us
Thank you very much,
something
Katie.
that keeps you busy right now.
Thank you very much, Katie, and thank you very much to the German Ministry of Health for hosting this event and inviting me. Thanks also to the previous speakers and their interesting presentations. So while I hope that the presentation is loading up, first of all, I would like to say good that we speak about it while it's very snowy here in Berlin. I don't know how it is in Freiburg for you, Andreas, but here it's actually snow. So this is definitely a sign that shows that we are considering this an issue also in the preparation phase. So I'm working in the international division of the German Red Cross. So I would like to speak a bit about how we are dealing with heat as a hazard in the international cooperations that we're doing, but also have a bit insights of the work that we do in Germany. So I think Dr. Kendrowski said a very important key word, which is timely. And this is what this concept that we're working on with anticipation is all about, to go before the impact of a hazard and really try to anticipate and really have actions before. So on this slide, what you can see is actually a lot. I will try to lead you through it. What we try to do with the anticipation is have the best use of accurate weather forecasting, and we heard a lot about that. We have this little icon on the bottom left which shows us the lead time that we have for anticipating heat in some areas. And what do we do with this information? When you look at the center image, this is an image of Hanoi and the most at-risk wards, where we as a humanitarian organization, together with our partner, the Vietnam Red Cross, try to figure out which indicators lead us to the most at-risk wards. And if we tie this together, we have the opportunity to really anticipate, meaning work in advance of materializing impact, and then do what you can see on the other pictures, also from Vietnam and also from Bangladesh and Kyrgyzstan, to have action campaigns, have information campaigns, have cooling centers, and really bring information and action before the impact of heat, so to really mitigate the worst possible outcomes. And if you want to learn more about this concept of anticipation in disaster risk management, make sure to check out anticipationhub.org. With that, I would invite you to go to the next slide, come to the next slide with me. And here we want to speak about urban areas, and you can see here a graph which is showing the relations of humanitarian actors in the background, just to show what complexity we have. On the top left, we have an image of Rajshahi, Bangladesh, and the heat map there. Professor Bowen already explained a lot about the urban heat island effect, which is definitely something that we have to work against as much as possible. So there's not to say too much about this after the excellent explanation from the professor. So I would like to invite you with the next image here to think about what social and political features we have to consider in a city, because the city is so many things. The city is a built structure of roads and buildings for sure, but it's a social network, and it's very dense, it's very diverse, and it's very dynamic, and this obviously makes it very difficult for us to understand where the most vulnerable people are. So at the same time, we have to consider that urban areas also have a lot of resources, and these networks are a very positive thing, which can obviously help us to mitigate also the heat impacts. So what is the answer from us, and what is the answer also from other organizations? State Secretary Steffen already mentioned it. Stakeholder engagement, community engagement. This is really the backbone of what we are as an international movement for Red Cross and Red Crescent. Really speak with the most vulnerable. But also, and now I'm taking the bridge to speak again about Germany with the next click. I'm very happy to see that actually my own hometown of Cologne has done an excellent job, including various groups when speaking about the adverse heat effects to senior citizens. And out of this process, you can show or you can see this list of recommendations. What was done both on the scientific side with the University of Bonn, but also through a series of community conversations. It was really tried to identify how elderly people can be supported in days of heat. So this is really the core of our work in urban areas. On the next slide, I would like to continue this comparison between the international and the domestic work, which I see from following both as best as I can. You see two pictures here. One is, I believe, from Stuttgart, Germany, and one is from Hanoi, Vietnam, and they're basically the same picture. And heat is a big challenge, but I'm also bringing some good news here, which is you can see that the analysis which I showed before on the indicators and also on the meteorological side is basically the same all over the world. We have different levels of resilience, obviously, if we're thinking about the level of resilience in Canada and India, for example, to show some extremes. on how much resilience we have individually against heat. But the way we analyze it is the same. So that's a good one. And then on the action side, it's also very similar. Obviously, we have longer-term solutions, which are costly and time-intensive when we're thinking about how we're designing our cities, green corridors, wind corridors, and we know a lot about it. But at the same time, we have also very low scale and cheaper solution, which is also something good. We know that on the individual level, if we adapt our daily schedules and if we adapt our behavior, we can support ourselves and we can support very vulnerable groups. But this is as long as people are aware and also decision makers are aware, because for a lot of us who are not in this room particularly, heat is still an invisible hazard. So this is why we need to continue speaking about it. And this is why I would like to go to the next and final slide from my side. Something that you have mentioned before, Katie, is that in a cooperation with the German Ministry of Health or during the G7 presidency of Germany in the last year, we have developed this information and learning product, especially for decision makers, where ministries of health have come together during the G7 presidency. And this was an innovative and creative information game where the participants were in the position of a mayor who had to prepare her city against the adverse effects of heat. So this is something that is close to my heart. I think we have the science in place, we have the examples in place, so we should continue speak about it, and we should continue speak about heat in easy terms. And I think such an innovative and maybe a little bit fun resource is a way to go. So if you have any questions, make sure to reach out. We have a lot of resources at the German Red Cross, but also with our partners of the international movement. For sure, there's more information coming also from our side on the management of cooling centers. So feel free to reach out, and back to you, Katie.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for elaborating what keeps you busy on your desk. Thank you for presenting your work. And I noted down some keywords, so we're coming back to you in a second. Just give us a few minutes, because with us also is Sophie Gapp. And I think, and I'm sure there are some thoughts echoing now in your mind as well. So what's important for you? What are your priorities when we have to talk about the management of heat waves? And where do you see still the to-dos and the priorities that we need to tackle for a sustainable heat health policy?
Yes, thank you very much. I would mention two things. I think one important thing, and it has been mentioned before, is reaching the vulnerable groups. And the question is, how do we do that? And for that, we need networks of actors that are already in touch with these groups. So, for example, often maybe governmental agencies might not be in touch with all of the vulnerable groups, or only with some of them, and we need actors. For example, I'll give you a very brief example. Who is in touch with elderly persons on a daily basis? It's, for example, people who provide meals on wheels. They are seeing these elderly people every day, and we need such kind of actors from the social sector, from the care sector, from the healthcare sector, both inpatient and outpatients, from disaster management, from nursing, and from public health, that can reach these vulnerable groups, and even from the broader social sector. So we need to build networks then that once a heat wave, heat alert is issued, heat warnings issued, that these networks can then effectively get in touch with elderly people, for example, or with other vulnerable groups. So this would be one thing. And I think involving all these actors doesn't only make us reach the vulnerable groups, but it also gives them ownership in a way to implement heat response measures, basically. And the second thing I would like to highlight is that we have to both prepare for heat, but while we are preparing for heat, we have to already work on it. So we can't rely on passing local legislation, and then we wait for this, and then we start building a network, and then we wait for this, and then we have the funding, and then we slowly start, because we know that we're already quite late. It was mentioned by WHO before, so we have to be a bit we have to already act while we're designing, and that might be a bit courageous and a bit difficult, or also there might be some barriers to that. But I think it's also a good way of testing out what works. So acting while designing, and then re-evaluating and redesigning is, I think, a good principle when it comes to heat health protection.
Thank you. Let's start into our conversations. Just give me a hand sign if you have a question burning on your chest while we are a little bit sweating here with another heat here in Dubai. Andreas, I'd like to start with you, because of course when we talk about heat, and you mentioned that earlier, and I think we have to also be always very careful with the language that we are using. In Europe, we often talk in the media and in the timelines about heat waves. When I'm busy or traveling in the global south or in other countries, you often talk about heat hazards. So just to, you as an expert, what is the right term to talk about? Do we talk about heat waves? Do we talk about heat hazards? Do we talk about heat in general? What would you wish to specify a little bit on the language term?
Good question, and difficult question in reality. I think the last years, and this is exactly what we experienced since 2018 here in Europe, because 2018 was, let me say, a long-lasting summer conditions. And when we talk about heat wave, is something extraordinary. That means it's higher than the usual levels that we know. It's something statistically. So from my side, I prefer to talk about heat and extreme heat. If it's something really which is extraordinary, then we can talk about heat wave. But for me, especially what I mentioned before, in this August, that wasn't for me a heat wave, that was really extreme heat.
Thomas, thank you. Thomas, would you agree? And also then a question just right after that, because of course we have then to translate this definition of what heat is, or what extreme heat might be as a consequence. How do you translate that to the vulnerable communities that you want to reach out to? And how do you do that successfully?
Exactly. I think this is the important question. I think when we speak about hazard versus heat wave, I think these are a bit technical terms, and I think this is not the priority when we're communicating outward. So what's very important to me is then when we're speaking about vulnerable groups, people don't like to be called vulnerable, people don't consider themselves vulnerable. So I think it's very important that we turn the switch around and say, okay, we have low-scale measures that everybody can take. This is very important. Heat is something that we can effectively tackle together, and we should do it throughout the year. Something that Andreas mentioned is that actually in the beginning of the season, they are quite dangerous already, maybe a little bit more than throughout the season, and we can have heat waves technically all year round. So it's about having this general thinking, I can do something about myself and I can do something for my community against heat. And then we as disaster risk management practitioners should have dedicated plans in place to see when actually we're going into a heat wave, and then also change to a more extreme or louder or more frequent information to the outside. But I think generally we should, not go into a panic or into a paralysis, but encourage people to consider it, but really give the authority to them and then say, okay, there's something that you can do about it.
Thank you. I already see 2 hand signs. I'm with you in a second. Just want to have one more last time, a minute with Sophie here. Sophie, when we talk about language, that's one thing. But we also need to work about cooperation and building networks and creating the initiatives and, fueling that muscle of cooperating and working together. So I want to dive into the Aktionsbündnis Hitzeschutz, which is a German term, very German, but it's literally translated as an initiative for heat protection alliance, and it comes from Berlin, which is now covered in snow, as we heard, but it has a large and beautiful hot city summers. So again, when we talk about the power of networks and the initiatives to manage heat waves or heat hazards, whatever term we're using, what is the learning? And then we come to your questions. Sophie.
Yes, thank you very much. So the Center for Planetary Health Policy is part of the German Alliance on Climate Change and Health, and together with other actors such as the Berlin Physician Chamber and the Senate Department for Science, Health and Care, Klug initiated this Aktionsbündnis Hitzeschutz, or Action Network, Action Alliance for Heat Protection. And I think one important thing that we see there is, in the past months, due to these actors working together, the attention on heat has risen quite a bit. However, we also see a different level of implementations in the different stakeholder groups that I mentioned. So outpatient versus inpatient, for example, or nursing nursing sector. And I think what is important there is to really mobilize kind of change agents within these sectors that then take it into their sectors and push for heat health action there, but also to think about what do we need. A lot of things are possible without, we can already start with coordination, etc. But I think if we look at it in the long term, we need responsibility has to be clear, and also resources. So if I look, for example, at the healthcare sector, a lot of the healthcare is already quite overstretched and doesn't have much time resources. So we would need to free these time resources to also implement heat health action.
So there's no lack of money, as I understand you correctly. You said lack of timing. Then, well, that's like a new problem. Normally I hear we need more money and there's a lack of finance. That's the normal goal. But how do you say? What do you say?
I don't think so. I think resources, both human resources for also a sustainable implementation that doesn't rely on single persons or single actors that are very active within the institutions, but gives responsibility and makes clear responsibilities for action are needed.
That also points a little bit to what Catherine Bowen was saying when she mentioned the savings that will be achieved when we sustainably invest in heat health protection. Right, so thanks you for underlining that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think the microphone is all yours now. We start here, and then we wander around. Please tell us who you are and what's your concrete question.
Yes, I'm Markus Große-Opper from the German Environmental Foundation. So we are here at a political conference, COP28, and the main theme is a global stocktake, and we hear there that we probably get a warming if we go on at the moment from 2.5 to 2.9 degrees. So I was looking a bit for what are the solutions. Can we handle such warming from the aspect of heat waves? What can we do to limit these warmings? So act from climate change is very simple, but what can we do for the heating up in the cities, for protecting special regions which are perhaps more vulnerable as Germany is? And that is my question. Mm-hmm. So what should we do on a political scale if we have heat waves in considering?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I hand that over to Andreas and Thomas. And Andreas, I'd like to start with you and then we come to Thomas. And maybe, Andreas, you can also include in your answers your work when it comes to the consultation for sports event, which is also one kind of a solution. And then, Thomas, it's all yours. So, Andreas, please.
Thanks, Katie. It's a good question. I would like to address this. It's a multifold question that has been said. I think concerning heat, we know a lot and we know how to deal, but we don't have to focus really on, looking for records, breaking records, that temperature will be 42 and so on. I think we need actions, and these actions have to be taken. And the communication is something which is very important. The Global Heat Health Information Network has produced this year a document for the media how to communicate, let me say, the negative implication, not showing pictures of people who are dying, but what have actions to be taken. Let's go back to the question about what has to be done on the political level. I think that, especially for Germany, that we had in the past, and Vladimir also still mentioned that we have in Europe the development of heat health action plans. 2016, beginning of 2017, the German government has released the heat health action plans recommendations for Germany. That is based on federal states, but there is no national level. This has started by the ministry. I think this is a very good movement that has been done. And what we reached this year or in the last 2 years is that really the topic or the issue of heat is an all-year topic. What has to be done? Everything that can be done is standing in the 8 success factors that we have in the heat health action plans. I think focusing on that is possible. We need to divide in short-term, medium-term, and long-term actions. And the short-term action is really the communication of heat and what has to be done in the short term. That means how this information is reached to the cities, to the care homes, and this has to be implemented. The moment that, and from my side, what I see the challenge is in the implementation. That means we can implement that. And one part can be by the government, what we have seen the development, Dr. Stefan still mentioned that in the beginning about the heat action plans for the hospitals and so on. This is the one part. The second part is education part. We have to deal about the education part, have to focus not on the residents who are in the hospitals, but also of the people working there. And the long term is really changing the face of the cities, changing the possibilities that we have in the cities. My background is from urban climatology. I know that we cannot solve all the problems of the urban heat island only increasing the green. This is not possible. We have to modify the surfaces, but we need to combine these effects that we have the long term and the short term. We have the heat action plans. Many of the factors that we need or the points and the actions that we need are included there. And this is something specific and something also what Professor Bowen mentioned. We don't have to talk separately about mitigation and separately about adaptation. Both is running together. We have the climate resilience planning and we have to work that. And Sophie mentioned that. We mentioned also we need more personal manpower. We need also financial sources, but many things can be done on the low level. And one of the best that we have, and this is something that we include in the heat warnings. In the warning level 1, we give several advices about indoor, about avoiding the sun, about reducing activities. But there's for the heat warning level 2, we also consider information care about others. This is the one point. And Katie, what you mentioned about the events, we will have next year the Euro in Germany.
When does it well, it's going to happen in summer, right?
This will be in summer. That was something similar with the soccer ship 2022, I think it was last year, where we ran this analysis about 10 years ago. And we recommended here that the time is not the best also in summer, but also during the day. And then this, based on that analysis that we have run, our recommendation was transfer this to the winter. The games have been transferred to the winter. We saw direct implications for the World Athletics 2019, where the marathon runners, many of them collapsed or they didn't start the game. And we find out the difference between men and women. And that was because the running was during the night, not during the day. The difference between men and women was as something like a equivalent temperature that I presented before. That's another approach that we had. The difference was running also during the night between men and women was 10 centigrade higher for women. And this is exactly what we need. This is exactly what we have to consider in our studies. And based on these simulations, then the Olympic Games in Tokyo, the marathon has been transferred to Sapporo. But this is not the only point. It's not only the athletes where we have to care. What about the spectators? What about the people, volunteers? We don't consider that. And it's not only the games that we will have in summer. What about other events, like fiestas?
Yeah.
That people want to do that. We have to care. And we need here a combination between the warning system about the next, as we have included in the heat trend, it's 4 to 5 days, which is not bad. And this is the one point. And the other point is when we create or we are planning that kind of events, it doesn't matter if this is athletic events and so on, we have to run, let me say, a long-term analysis to see which is the best time in order to run the competition.
Thank you, Andreas. I just come in here quickly. Don't want to be impolite, but just heading over to Thomas. But thank you so much, Andreas, for giving us your expertise in that regard. And 90 minutes are always too short for important topics. I know that, but that's my struggle. Just having the time in my back, Thomas. Listening to that, and of course, picking up the question again: what are solutions when we talk about the heat cities and the heat, heating up the cities and the heat islands in the cities? What are your experiences, especially when you can elaborate a little bit off the heat simulation exercise that you've also done? What are the best learnings that you can share with us on a short thought?
Thank you very much, Katie. And I think the answer from
hang on, Thomas. Can you hear him? Is it no? The sound's off. I just have him on my ear. So maybe to the colleagues in the yes. Now you're back. Thank you. You're back. Okay, let's go.
Okay.
The stage is yours.
Yeah. Apologies for that. Thank you. I think Andreas' answer was already quite comprehensive. So let me just add a few things to that. Obviously, from the Red Cross perspective, we're always speaking about the most vulnerable and how to identify them. We should be very considerate of the fact that these are the groups who may already be, to the outside of our society, or maybe more to the sides of the society. If you understand that picture. So it's very important to have them back in the center if we're speaking about elderly single households, if we're speaking about people with mental illnesses, if we're speaking about children under 5. These are people who deserve our most attention, and this is when we're thinking about heat or not. So this is just my claim, and I think we have all spoken with one voice today in that regard. I think something else that has been mentioned before is that we need to work together in networks, very much so in urban areas where there's so many players around the table. I think that it's very important that we speak with one voice. I think we should never give in to cynicism, because something that we have seen when we're speaking about disaster risk warnings and about heat, a very reluctant answer could be, I know how to deal with heat, or that's not an issue. I think no one of us wants to take away nice beach days from everybody. Or nice summer days with the family. Nobody wants that. We should just be aware. So this is why I said before, we should not go into panic or paralysis, but really encouraging, commonsensical behavior on days of heat. And lastly, and also mirroring what Andreas has said, you may be aware that the German Red Cross is often on standby in big sporting events or big festivities in general, or concerts as well. And also there will be a dedicated role at the Euro for the German Red Cross. I have discussed this matter actually on Friday with my colleague, and obviously we'll have very great respect about what could happen, and we will try to impact also our considerations into that. Also after the tragic loss of a fan or a visitor at a big pop concert in Brazil, which you may have heard about during a heat wave. And it's my understanding that it's not only peak summer in Brazil as of now. So the warning signs are there, and we try to prepare as best as we can. Back to you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you. So we brought Taylor Swift also now on stage, especially as an image, because that's the concert that you were talking about, right? All right, last question. Please be very precise in your question and tell us who you are.
Thank you very much. In light of the time, my name's Alan White. I'm the Climate Adaptation Chair for the Canadian Nursery and Landscape Association. My question's kind of twofold.
Put it a little bit closer, yeah, wonderful.
My question is kind of twofold and similarly related. The World Health Organization is not just related. Heat is one of the #1 effects on urban populations, particularly in high intensity and vulnerable areas, but also air pollution. And both are directly related. As the air pollution increases and CO2 levels go up, the heat island effect increases, which then increases the heat. And you just get in this ever-ending cycle. With this monitoring system and public health system that you're talking about, is air quality and pollution part of this monitoring system? And what solutions are being taken within the German environment to help mitigate this? Again, I've heard some innovative ideas in my world travels, and Germany being one of the leading ones in ideas like airflow mapping, urban design around how forests and open green spaces, building structures can all contribute to mitigating this trapped heat island to offset both pollution and heat.
So I think this question goes to Andreas, right? Concerning the airflows and how you involve airflow mapping and air pollution in the heat warning system. Andreas?
Yes, we have this information, especially for the microclimate. We don't involve that at the moment in the heat warnings of official warnings that we release for the heat health warning system. But we are in the moment developing for several cities this kind of possibilities, which involve the urban heat island. But this is something that cannot be included in the heat health warning system. This has to go further in the cities. This is something that is included.
Yeah.
But it's not on the regular basis or in operation mode. This has to be done by the cities. We cannot run all this for each city separately. What we can run is to find out where are the possibilities for reduction, or to have areas where situation is not so strong, or give the people the possibility to know the next green area is about 300 meters away, and so on. This I think is the focus for that. But your question was about air pollution and heat. Yes, when we talk about heat, we don't, especially the responsible people who deal with the heat, we of course are aware about that heat is not only temperature or humidity, it's a cocktail. And this cocktail has to be included. We have in Germany at the same time. We can have in Germany at the same time heat warning. We can have also UV warning, which is a combination. But UV is not all the time connected with the heat warning. But we know that before we release the heat warning, we check from the federal states in Germany, the air pollution departments, if they release also the air pollution warnings. There are some air pollution warnings. But in the last year, we didn't have so much high levels. But of course, we have to consider that. Maybe in the future, one possibility will be to have an index, which is about, let me say, don't want to call it danger, but maybe heat plus or heat star, in order to combine and save all this information. This can be included, but the one point is to include this in the warnings. The other point is how to communicate. When we communicate heat, and recommend advisors do that or take care about that. But I think the message has been arrived everywhere that is really a cocktail. It's not only temperature. Back to you.
Thank you, Andreas. Sophie, your thoughts on that, and then I have a last question to you.
Yes, two short points. So firstly, I think Andreas Mazarakis pointed out very well the long-term measures that we need, and prioritizing measures in, for example, city planning that both protect from heat and reduce air pollution is something that could be prioritized in that context. And then secondly, to your question, there is a limit to what we can adapt to. Catherine Bowen showed it beautifully that there was a really urgent warning from the IPCC also regarding the window of opportunity. And I think what we see is that heat is a very good entry point to talk not only about adaptation but also about climate protection and why we so urgently need action on that for health. So I think using this as a vehicle in institutions, in a communication with the population is really important, so that we can gather support for climate action.
Sophia, last question goes out to you because you're on a lot of panels, you talk to a lot of people, you are embedded in different communities and initiatives. Who's missing on the panel? Who is always not on stage? Who is always missing in these conversations? Who needs more spotlight? Not as a critique, but also as a learning reflection on how we shape the ecosystems where we have the conversations about managing heat, waves or heat stress, whatever term we're using, better. What do you think? Who should we invite next time?
I think often what is a really valuable voice that is unfortunately often overlooked is the voice of the most affected communities themselves. So who is most affected of heat, who's most affected on climate change and in general, and how do they perceive this? And I think this could lead to a very valuable exchange where we actually see the barriers also from the perspective of the persons that we are talking about sometimes. Yes,
yeah, absolutely. Thank you, guys. This is your round of applause. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And Andreas, Thomas, Sophie, thank you for being here on stage. Greetings to Berlin, to Freiburg. And have a successful COP so far in Dubai. And thank you to you for attending, for taking the time in your busy calendars. Come around here at the German Climate Pavilion. We have beautiful coffee, strong coffee for long days at the COP28. Feel very much invited, and I'll see you soon. Thank you for coming.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.